The rain hammered against the window like angry fingers demanding entry. Matching the frantic rhythm of my heart, I folded the tiny yellow onesie with trembling hands, the soft cotton a stark contrast to the rough calluses I'd developed from months of scrubbing floors and serving drinks at Antonio Ricci's estate, 3 a.m, the only time I could be certain he wouldn't catch me. Even the guards relaxed their vigilance during these hollow hours, when even the most devoted soldiers needed rest. Just a little longer, I whispered to the barely there swell beneath my oversized sweater. 16 weeks along, my secret, my miracle. My escape plan's sudden, terrifying complication. I tucked the onesie between layers of plain t-shirts in my duffel bag, burying any evidence of my condition beneath mundane possessions. The doctor's appointment card was already committed to memory. The clinic's address in Toronto burned into my brain, a lifeline located precisely 437 miles from Antonio's reach, or so I hoped. I hadn't always been a prisoner in this gilded cage. 8 months ago, I was just Eliza Moore, 24 years old, exhausted waitress working double shifts at Carlo's, an upscale Italian restaurant that barely kept my rent paid and student loans at bay. That night, I'd spilled a glass of Barolo on a patron's custom suit. Not just any patron, Marco Venuti, Antonio Ricci's right-hand man. I still remember the silence that descended over the restaurant, the way everyone seemed to collectively hold their breath. Marco's face had darkened, his hand instinctively reaching inside his jacket. I'd apologized profusely, offered to pay for dry cleaning with money I didn't have, dabbed at the stain with trembling hands until a different hand, larger, adorned with a heavy gold signet ring, gently caught my wrist. Enough. The voice was deep, quiet, accented, a command wrapped in velvet. Looking up, I'd found myself drowning in eyes so dark, they absorbed the restaurant's dim lighting rather than reflected it. Antonio Ricci hadn't been seated at the table originally. He'd materialized from somewhere in the back of the restaurant, appearing like a shadow solidifying into human form. "Sir, I'm so sorry about your friend's suit. I'll make it right, I promise." My voice had sounded pathetically small, even to my own ears. His mouth had curved into something not quite a smile. "Some messes can't be cleaned, only replaced." Then, to my manager who had rushed over, "Bill me for the suit, and for her remaining shift, Ms. Moore." Eliza Moore, I'd supplied automatically, still not understanding what was happening. "Ms. Moore will be leaving with me. She has a new position to fill, not a request. A statement of fact." I'd protested, of course, said I couldn't possibly leave mid-shift. Mentioned responsibilities, rent due in 3 days. He'd simply placed a stack of bills on the table that made my manager's eyes widen, then guided me toward the door with a hand hovering near, but never touching, the small of my back. Outside waited a black Bentley with darkened windows and a driver who opened the door without meeting my eyes. I remember thinking I should run, scream, fight, do anything but slide into that leather interior that smelled of expensive cologne and subtle menace. But I was tired, so tired of struggling, of counting pennies, of working myself to exhaustion. And something in his eyes, not kindness exactly, but a focused interest I'd never experienced, made me hesitate just long enough for curiosity to override caution. That hesitation cost me my freedom. Now, 8 months later, I lived in a wing of Antonio's estate, ostensibly as his personal assistant. I managed his household staff, organized his social calendar, and eventually warmed his bed. Not by force. He'd never needed to resort to that, but through a slow, deliberate seduction that felt like drowning in honey. Sweet, overwhelming, and impossible to escape. I zipped the duffel bag closed, wincing at the sound that seemed to echo through my spacious bedroom. Antonio had given me everything a woman could want. Designer clothes, jewelry, a platinum credit card with no limit. Everything except what I needed most, freedom. My hand drifted to my stomach again. I'd never planned on pregnancy. Antonio was careful, always. But nothing is foolproof, and the tiny life growing inside me changed everything. I couldn't raise a child in this world of shadows and violence, where hushed conversations in Antonio's study sometimes led to people disappearing, where even the gardeners carried concealed weapons. I slid the bag under the bed, knowing I'd retrieve it tomorrow while Antonio attended his monthly meeting with the other family heads. Marco would drive him, along with at least 4 guards. A 2-hour window, my only chance. Sleep eluded me for what remained of the night. When dawn painted my room in hues of gold and rose, I showered and dressed with mechanical precision, applying makeup to hide the shadows beneath my eyes. Antonio noticed everything. One sign of distress or unusual behavior would trigger his protective instincts, which were really just another form of control. I made my way to the dining room where breakfast awaited us every morning. Antonio was already there, reading something on his tablet, a cup of espresso steaming beside him. He wore a charcoal gray suit that hugged his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair slicked back from a face that belonged on Renaissance paintings, all sharp angles and aristocratic features. Buongiorno, tesoro. He didn't look up immediately, but I felt his awareness of me like a physical touch. Good morning, I replied, taking my usual seat to his right. A maid immediately appeared with my tea. Ginger, not my usual Earl Grey. I froze. Antonio's eyes flicked up then, catching my expression. You've been nauseous in the mornings. Ginger helps with that, I'm told. My heart stuttered. How had he noticed? I'd been so careful, always making it to the toilet before getting sick, running the shower to mask any sounds. Just a stomach bug, I managed, forcing a smile. Nothing serious. His dark eyes lingered on my face for a moment too long before returning to his tablet. If it persists, Dr. Maloney will visit. I don't like seeing you unwell. I nodded, unable to form words around the panic climbing up my throat. Dr. Maloney was Antonio's private physician, who treated his family members and top lieutenants. If he examined me, my secret would be exposed immediately. I feel much better today, I lied, sipping the tea to appease him. It actually did help settle my churning stomach, which only increased my unease at his perceptiveness. Good. He set down his tablet and gave me his full attention, a rare and unsettling experience. Antonio's focus was a tangible force, like standing in a spotlight. The meeting today will run long. Family business. Don't wait dinner for me. I nodded again, hope flaring bright and dangerous in my chest. Will Marco be with you? And Stefano, Paolo, and Dante. He named his most trusted guards. Why do you ask? I shrugged, aiming for casual. Just wondering if Marco will be available to drive me to the bookstore. I finished everything on my nightstand. Antonio's expression softened marginally. He approved of my reading habits, often discussing books with me late into the night. It was during those conversations I could almost forget who he was, what he did. Almost. Take Vincent, he said, referring to one of the younger guards. He can accompany you. I forced another smile. Thank you. Breakfast continued with mundane conversation. I asked about his schedule, reminded him of an upcoming charity gala, and carefully constructed the facade of a woman content with her golden cage. All the while my mind raced through contingencies. Vincent was newer, less experienced than Marco. Perhaps I could lose him in a department store, slip out a service entrance. Antonio rose from the table eventually, straightening his already impeccable tie. He moved around to my chair, tilting my face up with a finger under my chin. His touch was gentle, always gentle, which made the implications of his power all the more terrifying. Be good while I'm gone, he murmured, leaning down to press his lips against mine in a kiss that lingered, promising and possessive. Against my will, my body responded to him as it always did, heart racing, skin warming. This chemical reaction between us was part of my prison, shackling me with needs and desires I couldn't fully control. When he pulled away, his eyes had darkened, and for a panicked moment, I thought he might cancel his meeting. Instead, he straightened, brushing a thumb across my lower lip. We'll continue this tonight, he promised, the words sending conflicting waves of dread and anticipation through me. Then he was gone, his security detail falling into formation around him as he strode through the mansion and out to the waiting cars. I watched from the window as the small convoy disappeared down the long driveway, forcing myself to wait a full 30 minutes more to ensure they wouldn't return for some forgotten document or last-minute change. When I was certain, I moved quickly. I changed into jeans and a sweater, items I rarely wore since Antonio preferred me in dresses. I retrieved my duffel bag, adding a framed photo of my parents, long deceased, and the emergency cash I'd slowly accumulated from the shopping money Antonio gave me each week. Heart pounding, I made my way toward the service entrance near the kitchen. Vincent was in the security office, monitoring cameras. My path would take me through a blind spot I'd identified months ago, a space between the pantry and the staff exit where the camera's angle couldn't quite reach. The kitchen was empty except for Mrs. Rossi, the head cook, who was preparing dough for tonight's dinner. She glanced up, eyebrows rising at my casual attire. "Going somewhere, miss?" "Just to get some fresh air in the garden," I replied, with a smile I didn't feel. "Doctor's orders for this lingering stomach bug." She nodded sympathetically. "The air will do you good. Shall I bring you some tea there?" "No, thank you. I'll be back inside shortly." Each step toward freedom felt simultaneously like floating and wading through quicksand. I slipped through the pantry, counting my heartbeats, and edged along the wall toward the exit. The door opened silently. I'd oiled the hinges myself last week, and then I was outside, the autumn air cool against my flushed skin. I stuck to the hedgerow, keeping low, making my way toward the service gate where deliveries came through. Unlike the main entrance, this gate was manned by only one guard, typically the newest or lowest-ranking member of Antonio's security team. Today, it was Leo, barely 22, and still eager to impress. I'd made a point of being kind to him, bringing him coffee during cold morning shifts, remembering details about his mother in Sicily, building an alliance I hoped would now pay dividends. I approached openly, waving as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Morning, Leo," I called, forcing brightness into my voice. He straightened immediately. "Miss Moore, I didn't know you were going out today." I rolled my eyes conspiratorially. Last-minute errand for the boss, birthday gift for his sister, this was calculated. Leo was new enough that he might not know Antonio was an only child. He wants it to be a surprise, so... I pressed a finger to my lips. Leo hesitated, his training warring with his desire to please. "I should call Vincent to drive you. Vincent's busy with security checks," I lied smoothly. "Antonio said I could take a taxi to the boutique and back. It's just downtown, 15 minutes away." I glanced at my watch. "The shop closes for a private client at 11, so I really need to hurry." Another hesitation, shorter this time. "I should log this." "Of course," I agreed readily. "But maybe after I'm gone, if Vincent hears, he'll insist on coming along, and then the surprise will be ruined." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Between us, I think Antonio's testing Vincent's attention to detail, to see if he notices I've slipped away." This tipped the scales. Leo nodded, understanding the implicit message. Don't be the one to ruin the boss's test. "The taxi is meeting me just outside," I added, cementing the lie. "I'll be back before lunch." Leo pressed the button to open the service gate. The grinding mechanism sounded like freedom, like hope, like terror. I thanked him with a brilliant smile and walked. Not ran, never ran, through the opening and down the service road that would lead eventually to the main highway. Once out of sight of the gate, I pulled out my burner phone, purchased months ago during a rare supervised shopping trip, hidden in the lining of my winter coat, and called for an actual taxi to meet me at the gas station a mile away. Then I began walking, each step carrying me further from luxury and closer to uncertainty. I was halfway to the gas station when the sound of an engine made me freeze. It was too soon for Leo to have raised an alarm, too soon for anyone to be looking for me. But paranoia had become my constant companion, and I ducked behind a large oak tree, peering around its trunk as a black sedan slowed beside the spot where I'd been walking. The window lowered, revealing a middle-aged woman with a concerned expression. "Are you all right, dear?" she called. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" A civilian, an ordinary person. The relief made me dizzy. "I'm fine," I replied, emerging from behind the tree, embarrassed by my reaction. "Just waiting for my taxi." "It's meeting me at the gas station," she frowned. "That's still a fair walk. I'm headed that direction if you'd like a lift." Every instinct screamed caution, but she was clearly not one of Antonio's people. Just a good Samaritan. And every minute I remained on this road was another minute I could be spotted. "Thank you," I said, approaching her car. "That's very kind." The woman introduced herself as Margaret, a retired school teacher headed into town for her weekly bridge game. She chatted amiably about the unseasonable cold, her grandchildren in Boston, the rising price of groceries, normal concerns from a normal life that felt alien to me after months in Antonio's world. "And where are you headed, dear?" she asked as we approached the gas station. "Toronto," I said, the word tasting like freedom on my tongue. Just need to catch a taxi to the bus station. Margaret's eyebrows rose. That's quite a journey. Family there? A fresh start, I replied, offering no further explanation. Something in my tone must have communicated more than my words, because Margaret's expression softened with understanding. She didn't ask more questions, just pulled into the gas station and wished me luck with a warmth that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. The taxi arrived 15 minutes later. I directed the driver to the bus station in the neighboring town rather than the local one, another precaution against being found too quickly. During the ride, I kept checking the rear window, half expecting to see one of Antonio's black SUVs appearing in pursuit. At the station, I purchased a ticket for the next bus to Buffalo, which would depart in 40 minutes. From there, I would cross into Canada and continue to Toronto. The clerk barely looked at me as he processed my payment in cash, giving no indication that my face meant anything to him. Why would it? Despite Antonio's prominence in certain circles, he kept a low public profile. His power operated in shadows, not spotlights. I found a seat in the furthest corner of the waiting area, positioning myself to watch both the entrance and the large windows overlooking the parking lot. Every person who entered sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system, but none were the broad-shouldered figures of Antonio's security team. The minutes crawled by. I tried to eat a granola bar from a vending machine but couldn't manage more than a few bites. My phone, my real one, not the burner, remained switched off and buried at the bottom of my bag. By now, Vincent had surely discovered my absence. How long before he alerted Antonio? Before the full might of Antonio's organization mobilized to find me. Now boarding for Buffalo, announced a bored voice over the intercom. I shouldered my bag and joined the small queue of passengers, mostly elderly travelers and college students, normal people with normal lives. I would be one of them soon. Anonymous. Free. The bus was half empty, allowing me a row to myself. I took the window seat, pressing my forehead against the cool glass as the engine rumbled to life. Outside, pigeons scattered across the parking lot, taking flight in a synchronized panic that made my heart stutter. I scanned the lot frantically, seeking the cause of their alarm, and saw him, not Antonio. Marco. He stood beside a black Escalade, sunglasses concealing his eyes, phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't looking toward the bus, wasn't moving toward the station, yet. My body went cold, then hot, then numb. How had they found me so quickly? Leo must have called Vincent despite my instructions, or perhaps the cameras I'd thought I'd avoided had caught me after all. Antonio's reach was longer, his resources greater than I'd calculated. The bus pulled away from the station, and Marco's head turned, tracking the movement. For one terrible moment, I thought he'd seen me, but the tinted windows of the bus protected me from view. Still, I slid down in my seat, using my duffel bag as a shield between me and the window as the bus lumbered onto the main road. I didn't breathe properly until we'd been driving for 20 minutes, the station far behind us. Even then, I remained vigilant, studying each vehicle that passed or followed us for too long. When we stopped at a rest area halfway to Buffalo, I stayed on the bus, ignoring my bladder's protests. I couldn't risk being seen, couldn't risk stepping out into the open. The 4-hour journey to Buffalo felt like 40. By the time we arrived, my nerves were frayed, my muscles cramped from maintaining tension for so long. I waited until all other passengers had disembarked before making my own exit, scanning the new station for familiar faces. Nothing, no one. I hurried to the women's restroom, locking myself in a stall to finally relieve my screaming bladder and collect my thoughts. The border crossing would be the next challenge. I had my passport. Antonio had never restricted my documents, confident in other means of keeping me tethered to him. But crossing international boundaries meant security cameras, official records of my passage, breadcrumbs for Antonio to follow. But I had no choice. Toronto offered the anonymity of a major city and, more importantly, the specialized prenatal clinic I'd researched obsessively. My baby, our baby, would need careful monitoring due to my medical history. A heart murmur I'd had since childhood meant pregnancy carried additional risks. Risks I couldn't ignore even while running for my freedom. I splashed water on my face, reapplied minimal makeup, and tried to look like someone with nothing to hide. In the mirror, a pale woman with huge blue eyes stared back at me, fear visible despite my efforts. I took several deep breaths, straightened my shoulders, and recited the mantras that had kept me going these past weeks. I am stronger than I look. This child deserves better. I will not live in fear. The taxi queue outside the station moved quickly. When my turn came, I requested a ride to the Peace Bridge border crossing, and the driver nodded without interest. This close to Canada, such crossings were routine. "Business or pleasure in Canada?" he asked, making conversational small talk as we drove. "Visiting family," I lied smoothly. "My sister just had a baby." "Nice. Boy or girl?" "Girl." They named her Emma. The fabrication came easily, details flowing to support the fiction. Antonio had taught me this unwittingly. I'd watched him create convincing narratives on the fly during business calls, spinning webs of half-truths that entrapped listeners in their plausibility. At the border crossing, I joined the pedestrian line, passport in hand, rehearsing my cover story. The line moved steadily forward until suddenly it was my turn, my passport being examined by an officer whose face betrayed no emotion. "Purpose of your visit to Canada?" "Visiting my sister and her new baby in Toronto." "Length of stay?" 2 weeks. "Where are you staying?" "With my sister, at 247 Brunswick Avenue." The address I'd memorized for the clinic altered slightly. "Anything to declare?" "No, sir." He stamped my passport, barely looking at me. "Enjoy your stay in Canada, ma'am." Just like that, I was through, on Canadian soil. Still not safe. Nowhere would be truly safe as long as Antonio lived, but further from his immediate reach. I hailed another taxi on the Canadian side, directing it to the nearest car rental agency. Using the fake ID I'd obtained months ago, another precaution planned during sleepless nights, I rented a nondescript gray Honda and headed for Toronto, 3 hours northeast. The highway stretched before me, Canadian farmland rolling past my windows. For the first time since leaving the estate, I allowed myself to think beyond the immediate next step. I had enough cash for 2 months in a modest apartment if I budgeted carefully. The clinic appointment was scheduled for next week. I would need prenatal vitamins, proper food, winter clothes as my pregnancy progressed, and the Canadian winter deepened. I would need a job, something that paid cash, something that wouldn't require extensive background checks. Waitressing again, perhaps, though the irony of returning to the profession that had delivered me to Antonio in the first place wasn't lost on me. Most of all, I would need to disappear. New name, new appearance, new life. The old Eliza Moore would cease to exist, replaced by someone I hadn't fully invented yet. Rain began to fall as I approached Toronto, the skyscrapers emerging through mist like sentinels. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, paying cash for 3 nights. The room was clean but sparse, a far cry from my luxurious quarters at Antonio's estate. The contrast didn't bother me. This shabby room represented choice, not captivity. I showered, letting hot water sluice away the journey's tension, then collapsed onto the bed. Exhaustion claimed me immediately, pulling me into dreams filled with pursuing shadows and dead ends. I woke disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling confusing me until memory rushed back. Free. I was free. My phone showed 7:14 p.m. I'd slept for nearly 5 hours. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, reminding me I was eating for 2 now. The motel office had advertised a diner across the street. Not gourmet Italian cuisine prepared by Mrs. Rossi, but it would suffice. I pulled on fresh clothes and was reaching for the door when a knock froze me mid-motion. 3 sharp raps, authoritative, familiar. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. Not already. Not here. "Housekeeping," called a female voice with a thick Eastern European accent. Relief made my knees buckle. "No, thank you," I called back. "I don't need service today." "Okay, sorry to disturb," came the reply, followed by the sound of a cart rolling away. I waited several minutes before opening the door, peering out cautiously before stepping into the evening air. The diner's neon sign buzzed across the street, promising hot food and normalcy. Inside, I slid into a booth and ordered a cheeseburger, fries, and a prenatal-safe herbal tea I'd researched. The waitress raised no eyebrows at my order or my solitude, just another traveler passing through. Invisible in the most wonderful way. As I waited for my food, I pulled out the burner phone and searched for local apartments for rent. Tomorrow I would begin viewing places, prioritizing buildings with security entrances and multiple exit routes. The clinic was in a neighborhood called the Annex. Perhaps I could find something nearby. My food arrived, and I devoured it with an appetite that surprised me. The simple meal tasted better than any of the gourmet dishes I'd grown accustomed to. Freedom, it seemed, was the best seasoning. I was halfway through my fries when the diner's door opened, admitting a blast of cool air and a trio of men in business suits. I glanced up automatically, then froze, a fry suspended halfway to my mouth. None of them were Antonio's men, of course they weren't. Just ordinary businessmen stopping for dinner. But the moment of panic lingered, curdling in my stomach. This would be my life now, flinching at shadows, seeing threats in every dark-haired man. Never fully relaxing, the weight of it settled on my shoulders. A different kind of prison. No. I refused to live that way. I would be cautious, yes, but not paralyzed by fear. I finished my meal deliberately, paid the bill, and walked back to the motel with measured steps. In my room, I unpacked properly, hanging my few clothes in the closet, arranging toiletries in the bathroom, making this temporary space mine. A small act of defiance against the impermanence that had defined my recent existence. The baby clothes, the yellow onesie that had nearly betrayed me. I placed under my pillow a talisman, a promise. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, hand on my stomach. "We're going to be free." I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of Antonio. Not nightmares of pursuit, but worse somehow. Dreams of his touch, his rare smiles, the moments when I'd almost convinced myself what we had was love, not possession. I woke aching with a confused blend of relief and loss that disgusted me. The next 3 days passed in a blur of apartment viewings and practical preparations. I found a small one-bedroom in a secure building 10 blocks from the clinic, signing a month-to-month lease under my false identity. I purchased essentials, groceries, additional clothing, a prepaid Canadian phone. I scouted the neighborhood, noting escape routes, police stations, 24-hour businesses where I could seek refuge if needed. Each night, I checked the locks 3 times before sleeping. Each morning, I scanned the street from my window before venturing out. Hypervigilance became my companion, as constant as the gentle fluttering I'd begun to feel from the life growing within me. On the 4th day, I visited the clinic for my initial appointment. The doctor was kind, competent, asking no questions about my missing medical records or absent partner. She confirmed what I already knew: 16 weeks pregnant with a seemingly healthy baby. Too early to determine gender, but all measurable indicators within normal ranges. "Your heart murmur is mild," she assured me after listening to my chest. "We'll monitor it closely, but I don't anticipate complications if you follow care guidelines." I left with prenatal vitamins, pamphlets on maternal nutrition, and a small black and white sonogram image that I couldn't stop staring at. A tiny human with clearly visible fingers, a defined spine, the round curve of a head. My child. Antonio's child. A human being who deserved better than the life either of us had planned. I tucked the sonogram into my wallet, nestled beside my fake ID. Proof of my purpose, my reason for running. Looking at it brought clarity whenever doubts crept in. And they did creep in, particularly at night when loneliness pressed heaviest. By the end of my 2nd week in Toronto, I'd established the beginnings of a routine. I found work at a small cafe 3 blocks from my apartment. Nothing fancy, just serving coffee and pastries to morning commuters. The owner, May, was a Chinese-Canadian woman in her 60s who asked few questions and paid in cash at the end of each shift. My pregnancy wasn't showing enough yet to raise questions, and I'd invented a convenient fiction about a husband in the military, deployed overseas, to discourage personal inquiries. The work was exhausting in my condition, but the mundane interactions with customers helped anchor me to this new reality. Each "thank you" and "have a nice day" exchanged with a stranger reinforced that I was just another person now, unremarkable, unworthy of a second glance. At night, I researched childbirth classes, pediatricians, childcare options, planning for a future that still felt precarious, but increasingly possible. I even allowed myself to browse baby furniture online, though I purchased nothing that couldn't be abandoned at a moment's notice. I was adapting, surviving, almost beginning to believe I'd escaped. Then came the roses. They arrived at the cafe during my morning shift exactly 17 days after I'd fled Antonio's estate. 24 blood-red blooms arranged in a crystal vase I recognized immediately. Baccarat crystal. Antonio's preferred brand for the fresh flowers that had appeared in my room each week at his home. "Delivery for Eliza," announced the courier, setting the arrangement on the counter. May clapped her hands in delight. "Secret admirer?" she asked, eyeing the luxurious arrangement. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. The room tilted dangerously, edges blurring. "Eliza? Are you all right?" May's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Fine," I managed, just surprised. "There's a card," she pointed out, reaching for the small envelope nestled among the blooms. "I'll read it later," I said quickly, snatching it before she could open it. "Private. From my husband." The lie tasted like ashes. May nodded, still admiring the flowers. "Very romantic man, your husband." These must have cost a fortune. Money had never been an object for Antonio. What he valued was possession, complete and unchallenged. I finished my shift mechanically, smiling at customers while my mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios. How had he found me? What surveillance had I missed? Was he here, in Toronto, or merely demonstrating his reach? The card remained unopened in my pocket. A ticking bomb I couldn't bring myself to defuse. Only when I'd locked myself in the employee bathroom did I finally extract it with trembling fingers. The envelope contained a single card, with a handwritten message in Antonio's elegant script. "The penthouse suite at the Ritz-Carlton. 8 p.m. tonight. Come home, Tesoro." This game has gone on long enough. No threats. No mention of consequences if I refused. He didn't need to spell them out. I tore the card into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. Then I bent over the sink, splashing cold water on my face to combat the wave of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. I couldn't go back to May, couldn't face her questions, or the damning roses still displayed prominently on the counter. Instead, I grabbed my coat and slipped out the back door, texting her that I felt ill and needed to leave early. Outside, the November air bit at my cheeks, but I barely noticed. My eyes darted in every direction, searching for watchers, for the familiar silhouettes of Antonio's security team. The street looked normal. Commuters hurrying past, a mother pushing a stroller, construction workers repairing a storefront, but normalcy meant nothing. Antonio's people excelled at blending in. I walked briskly toward my apartment, then abruptly changed direction, ducking into a department store. I wandered through cosmetics, housewares, and women's clothing, constantly checking behind me, before exiting through a different door. From there, I caught a bus heading west, away from both my apartment and the Ritz-Carlton, and rode it to the end of the line. I found myself in a suburban neighborhood I didn't recognize, with chain restaurants and big-box stores lining a wide avenue. Anonymous. Interchangeable with 1,000 similar North American neighborhoods. I ducked into a chain coffee shop and ordered herbal tea, claiming a table in the corner with clear sightlines to all entrances. Think, Eliza, think. I couldn't return to my apartment. It was surely compromised. Couldn't go back to the cafe. Couldn't access what remained of my emergency cash, hidden in a lockbox under my bed. All the careful preparations of the past 2 weeks, rendered useless in an instant. I could run again. Find another city, another identity. But how long before Antonio found me there too? His network was vast, his resources seemingly limitless. And I was pregnant, increasingly vulnerable, with dwindling funds and no support system. The alternative, meeting him at the Ritz, accepting whatever terms he offered, made my stomach clench. I knew Antonio. He wouldn't physically harm me, especially not while I carried his child. But he would never forgive this betrayal. Never trust me again. The relative freedom I'd enjoyed before would seem expansive compared to the restrictions he'd impose now. A golden cage would become an iron one. As the afternoon wore on, I considered and discarded a dozen different plans. Go to the police? With what evidence? Antonio's legitimate businesses formed a perfect shield for his other activities. Cross the border back to the States? Impossible without returning to my apartment for my passport. Disappear into Toronto's shelter system? Unsustainable in my condition, and too risky for the baby's health. By 6 o'clock, resignation had settled like lead in my stomach. I had no viable alternatives. I would meet Antonio, negotiate whatever terms I could for my child's future, and accept the consequences of my failed escape. I hailed a taxi to the Ritz-Carlton, a gleaming tower in downtown Toronto. The lobby was exactly what one would expect. Marble floors, tasteful lighting, discreet staff who betrayed no reaction to my casual attire among the well-heeled guests. I approached the front desk with as much confidence as I could muster. "I'm expected in the penthouse suite," I said simply. The clerk nodded, reaching for a key card. "Mr. Ricci mentioned you would be arriving, Ms. Moore." The private elevator is to your right. Of course he'd used his real name. Antonio didn't need aliases or subterfuge. His power was such that he operated in plain sight, confident in his untouchability. The private elevator required the key card to access the penthouse level. As it ascended, I studied my reflection in the mirrored walls. Pale face, shadows beneath my eyes, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. So different from the polished appearance Antonio preferred. Let him see what his pursuit had reduced me to. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer. Beyond, floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Toronto's glittering skyline, the CN Tower illuminated against the night sky. The suite was immense, decorated in creams and golds, fresh flowers everywhere. Roses again, their sweet scent cloying in the heated air. Eliza. My name, spoken in that familiar accent, sent a shiver down my spine. I turned slowly. Antonio stood by the fireplace, one hand in the pocket of tailored trousers, the other holding a tumbler of amber liquid. He wore no jacket, just a crisp white shirt with rolled sleeves revealing powerful forearms. His dark hair was shorter than when I'd left, emphasizing the sharp angles of his face. But it was his eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, that captured me, as always. They revealed nothing while seeing everything. "You're late," he observed, glancing at his watch. "It's 8:17. I found my voice, determined not to show weakness. I considered not coming at all. A slight incline of his head, acknowledging the point. Yet here you are. You didn't leave me many options. I left you none. He took a sip of his drink. That was the point. He gestured to a sitting area near the windows. Sit. You look tired. I remained standing. How did you find me? The question provoked something like disappointment in his expression. You know better than that, Tesoro. I never lost you. A cold weight settled in my chest. The border crossing? Among other things. He set his glass down and approached, moving with the fluid grace that had always reminded me of a predator. Did you really think I wouldn't have systems in place? That I wouldn't be alerted the moment your passport was scanned? He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and cedar, expensive and familiar. My traitor body responded with a surge of awareness I despised. You've been watching me all this time, I realized aloud. The apartment, the cafe, of course. You're mine, Eliza. I protect what's mine. The possessive declaration should have angered me, but exhaustion dulled my reactions. Why wait? Why let me believe I was free for over 2 weeks? Something complicated crossed his features. I was curious to see what you would do, where you would go. His eyes drifted to my stomach, still mostly flat beneath my sweater. What you were hiding from me. My hand moved instinctively to cover my abdomen. How long have you known? Suspected? Since before you left. Confirmed? The day after, when I found your hidden prenatal vitamins. His jaw tightened. You should have told me. Would it have mattered? Would you have let me go? A harsh laugh escaped him. Go? Why would I ever let you go? He moved closer, backing me against the window. And now that you carry my child, never. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone in a touch so gentle it nearly undid me. This was Antonio's most dangerous weapon, the contrast between his implacable will and his tender gestures, the illusion of choice within absolute control. I'm not going back, I said, injecting steel into my voice. Not to be a prisoner. You were never a prisoner, Eliza. What would you call it then? I couldn't leave the estate without guards. Couldn't speak to anyone without your knowledge. Couldn't make a single decision about my own life. His expression darkened. I gave you everything. Security, luxury, a position at my side few women would ever achieve. Everything except freedom. Freedom, he repeated, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. To do what? Return to working double shifts for tips? To that apartment where the heat failed every winter? To dodging your landlord on the first of each month? His fingers tightened slightly on my jaw. I saved you from that life. I didn't ask to be saved. No one who needs saving ever does. He released me and stepped back, retrieving his drink. You're being dramatic, Tesoro. You had freedoms. You managed my household, organized events, accompanied me to business dinners. Traveled with me to Milan, to Paris. Always under watch, always within the boundaries you set. He shrugged, unmoved. "The world is dangerous, particularly my world. That's exactly why I left," I said, my voice rising despite my determination to remain calm. "I won't raise our child in that environment. Surrounded by violence, by criminal activity, by fear." The glass in his hand stilled halfway to his lips. "Our child," he repeated softly, eyes dropping again to my stomach. "A son?" "I don't know yet. It's too early to tell." Something shifted in his expression then, a softening I hadn't anticipated. He set his glass down and approached me again, this time dropping to one knee before me. Before I could react, he pressed his palm flat against my abdomen, his large hand spanning almost the entire slight swell. "My child," he murmured, reverence mixing with possessiveness in his tone. "My blood." I remained frozen, unsure how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability. Antonio had never spoken of wanting children, had never indicated family life was part of his vision for us, yet the naked longing on his face as he touched the evidence of his progeny was unmistakable. "Family is everything, Eliza," he said, still kneeling. "Everything I do to build a legacy, to create something that will outlast me." He looked up, dark eyes intense. "This child changes everything." "How?" I asked cautiously. "How does it change anything?" He rose smoothly to his feet. "You will come home. Both of you will come home. But things will be different." "Different how?" "You want freedom? I will give you parameters within which you can move freely. You want safety? I will increase security, ensure no harm ever comes to either of you." His hand cupped my face again. "You want recognition? I will marry you, make you officially mine in the eyes of the world." The offer stunned me. Antonio had never mentioned marriage before. In his world, legal ties were complications, potential vulnerabilities. That he would consider it now. "Marriage doesn't solve the fundamental problem," I said slowly. "Your business, your lifestyle, cannot be changed entirely," he interrupted, "but can be adjusted. Legitimate enterprises expanded, certain other activities delegated or discontinued." I stared at him, searching for deception and finding none. "You would do that? For the child?" "For my family," he corrected. "For what matters most." His words hung in the air between us, a promise I wasn't sure I could trust. Antonio never made concessions. He negotiated, manipulated, and ultimately prevailed. This sudden willingness to compromise felt like another trap, more subtle, but no less confining. "I need time," I said finally, "to think about what you're offering." Antonio's expression hardened. "You misunderstand, Tesoro. This isn't a negotiation where you walk away to consider terms. You're coming home with me tonight. And if I refuse?" His smile was cold. "Then things become considerably less pleasant. Not for you, never for you, but perhaps for May, whose expired visa I've been graciously ignoring. Or for that doctor at the prenatal clinic who prescribes herself controlled substances. So many vulnerable people in your new life, Eliza." The threat, delivered so casually, stole my breath. This was the Antonio I'd fled. The man who viewed people as chess pieces, who found everyone's weakness and exploited it mercilessly. "You wouldn't," I whispered, knowing even as I said it that he absolutely would. "I would prefer not to," he acknowledged. "I would prefer you make the intelligent choice. The choice that protects our child and secures your comfort." He checked his watch. "The jet is waiting. We leave in 1 hour." "The jet? We're flying back tonight?" "Of course. I have business to attend to tomorrow. Important meetings I've postponed for this retrieval operation." The clinical term made me flinch. That's all this was to him. An asset retrieval, like recovering stolen property. Despite his declarations about family, about marriage, nothing fundamental had changed in how he saw me. As a possession. His possession. "I need to pack my things," I said, playing for time. "My clothes, my unnecessary. Everything you need is at home. Anything specific can be replaced." "Of course." My meager Toronto belongings were beneath his notice, unworthy of delay. The practical items I'd purchased for the baby, a few onesies, soft blankets, a stuffed rabbit, were nothing compared to what Antonio would provide. Designer clothes, custom furniture, a nursery that would rival royal accommodations, a gilded cage for a second generation. 1 hour, I repeated dully. Antonio nodded, satisfied with my apparent acquiescence. He returned to the sidebar to refill his drink, his back momentarily to me. Would you like something? Non-alcoholic, of course. Water, please. He filled a crystal tumbler from a bottle of San Pellegrino. He'd always insisted on the Italian brand even in America, and brought it to me, his fingers brushing mine in the transfer. The casual contact sent an unwelcome jolt through me, a reminder of the physical chemistry that had been part of my imprisonment. Sit, he suggested again, gesturing to the plush sofa. You look pale. This time I obeyed, partly because my legs truly did feel weak beneath me. Antonio took a seat opposite, studying me with the intense focus that had always made me feel simultaneously seen and dissected. You've lost weight, he observed. Not eating properly? The concern in his voice sounded genuine, which only confused me further. Antonio's ability to compartmentalize was extraordinary. He could threaten innocent people one moment and worry about my nutrition the next, seeing no contradiction in his behavior. Morning sickness, I replied. It comes and goes. He frowned. Dr. Maloney will examine you as soon as we return. You'll have whatever specialists you need. His gaze softened marginally. No expense will be spared for your care or the child's. You know that. I did know that. Antonio's generosity had never been the issue. It was the price of that generosity, complete surrender of autonomy, that I couldn't accept. And after the baby is born, I asked, what then? Will I be allowed to take them for walks without an armed escort? To choose their school without your approval? To visit my friends without reporting my whereabouts? You have no friends, Eliza, he said bluntly. You had acquaintances before me. Co-workers, former classmates, none of whom reached out when you disappeared from your old life, and you've made no meaningful connection since. He leaned forward. I am your world. I have been since that night at Carlo's. The sooner you accept that reality, the happier you'll be. The worst part was that he wasn't entirely wrong. My life before Antonio had been a lonely struggle for survival, working too many hours to maintain real friendships. And he had systematically isolated me since, ensuring my emotional dependence matched my financial one. That's not normal, I said quietly. It's not healthy. Normal is a luxury for ordinary people, he replied. Neither of us is ordinary, Tesoro. Certainly, our child won't be. I sipped my water, mind racing for options, for leverage, for any path that didn't lead back to complete capitulation. But Antonio had outmaneuvered me at every turn. He'd found me with ease, neutralized my meager attempts at independence, and now held others hostage to my compliance. You said things would be different, I reminded him, grasping at the one thread of hope. What exactly did you mean? Antonio set his glass down, steepling his fingers in a gesture I recognized from his business negotiations. As my wife, you would have certain additional protections and privileges. Legal rights to property, to financial assets. I don't care about money. Everyone cares about money, Eliza. Those who say otherwise simply haven't experienced true poverty. His tone was didactic, as if educating a naive child. But beyond financial security, you would have status within the family, respect and deference from my associates, a voice in matters that concern our household and our child, but not in your business. No, never that. His expression hardened. Those boundaries remain absolute. Even the legitimate businesses? He considered this, head tilting slightly. Perhaps in time, certain aspects. You have a good mind for organization, for detail, skills that could be useful in the right context. It wasn't much, but it was the first genuine concession he'd offered. A small acknowledgement of my capabilities beyond decorative companion and mother of his heir. And the security, the constant supervision, non-negotiable, particularly now. His eyes dropped to my stomach again. But we can discuss adjustments. Protocols that feel less intrusive while maintaining necessary protection. I thought of the guards who followed me through department stores, the cameras in every room of the estate, the drivers who reported my every movement. Define, less intrusive. Female guards for personal shopping, private areas of the estate without surveillance, scheduled time alone if you require it. His jaw tightened. Within secure parameters. Again, small concessions. Crumbs of autonomy offered as if they were feasts. Yet compared to my previous existence in his world, They represented progress. The question was whether they were genuine offers or merely temporary enticements to secure my compliance. And if I agree to all this, I said carefully, how can I trust you'll keep your word? That these adjustments won't disappear the moment we're back on American soil? Antonio's expression darkened. Have I ever broken a promise to you, Eliza? Ever said one thing and done another? I had to admit he hadn't. Antonio's peculiar moral code included absolute honesty with those in his inner circle. He might omit information, might manipulate through selective truth, but outright lies were beneath him. No, I conceded. But this situation is different. I betrayed you, ran from you. Most men would. I am not most men, he interrupted sharply, and you are not dealing with a wounded male ego. This is business, Eliza. You are an asset who attempted to self-extract. I've recovered you. Now we renegotiate terms to prevent future extraction attempts. His clinical framing should have offended me, but there was something almost reassuring in his pragmatism. Antonio approached everything as a transaction, a series of calculated moves. Emotion rarely clouded his decisions, which made his promises, however limited, more reliable than passionate declarations would have been. And the child? I pressed. What role do you envision for yourself as a father? Something shifted in his expression then, a complexity I couldn't fully interpret. I never knew my father, he said after a moment. He was killed when I was an infant. My mother raised me alone until her brother, my uncle Salvatore, took us in. His eyes grew distant. Salvatore became my model, my mentor. He taught me everything. Business, respect, family loyalty. A pause. I will be present for my child in ways my father couldn't be. It was the most personal information Antonio had ever shared with me. In our months together, he'd revealed little about his childhood or his path to power. This glimpse into his past, into the forces that shaped him, gave me pause. You want to be involved, I said. Not just financially, but actually involved in raising them. Of course. He looked genuinely surprised at my doubt. My child will know me, will learn from me, will understand their heritage and responsibilities. His expression softened almost imperceptibly, but will also be protected from the harsher aspects of that heritage, at least until they're of age. I tried to picture it. Antonio reading bedtime stories, attending school functions, teaching a toddler to walk. The images wouldn't quite form, yet I couldn't deny the sincerity in his voice when he spoke of fatherhood. Whatever else Antonio might be, he valued family above all else. Our child would be cherished, if also burdened by expectations I couldn't fully imagine. One last question, I said, setting my water glass down. Why marriage? Why make it official? It's a complication you've always avoided. Antonio rose and moved to sit beside me on the sofa, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Several reasons, he said, his voice dropping to a register that had always affected me deeply. Legally, it provides the strongest protection for both you and the child. Strategically, it sends a message to potential rivals about your importance to me. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my skin. And personally, I find I want it. Want you to bear my name. Want that commitment between us. His candor caught me off guard. I'd expected a purely practical explanation, not this hint of emotional investment. Antonio didn't do vulnerability, didn't expose inner desires, that he would admit to wanting this bond between us, not just for practical advantages but for personal reasons, suggested a depth of feeling I hadn't anticipated. I need your answer, Eliza, he said quietly. The jet is waiting. Either we leave together, with a new understanding between us, or I make certain calls that will have unfortunate consequences for those you've befriended here. And there it was, the threat beneath the negotiation, the steel fist within the velvet glove. Whatever genuine feeling Antonio might have for me, for our child, his fundamental nature remained unchanged. He would use any leverage, inflict any collateral damage, to achieve his objectives. I looked around the luxurious suite, at the skyline beyond the windows, at the brief taste of freedom I'd experienced. Then I looked at Antonio, the man who had captured me body and soul from our first meeting, who had given me a life of unprecedented privilege and unprecedented constraint, who now offered a modified cage in exchange for my willing return. If I come back, I said slowly, I want it in writing, all of it. The terms of my freedom, the boundaries, the concessions. A formal agreement. A smile curved his lips, not the cold one from earlier, but the rare, genuine expression that transformed his face from intimidating to devastatingly handsome. A contract? How very American of you, Tesoro. I'm serious, Antonio. I know you are. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded document, which is why I had this prepared before I came. Of course he had. Antonio was always 3 steps ahead, anticipating my moves before I made them. I took the papers with unsteady hands, scanning clauses about personal security protocols, private areas of the estate, financial provisions, educational trusts for the child. You'll note there's nothing about my business operations, he said, watching me read. Those remain separate, as discussed. The document was surprisingly comprehensive, addressing most of the concerns I'd raised and some I hadn't considered. It even included provisions for regular visits to my preferred doctors in Toronto, with appropriate security arrangements. This is thorough, I admitted. I know what matters to you, Eliza. I've always known. He took the papers back, setting them on the coffee table. We can revise if necessary, but the framework is sound, legal, binding, and enforceable. Enforceable by whom? You own half the judges in 3 states. He inclined his head, acknowledging the point. Then trust must form part of our arrangement, as it does in any marriage. Marriage. The word still startled me each time he said it. Marriage to Antonio Ricci. A commitment even more binding than the invisible chains that had held me before. Yet also, potentially, a source of power I hadn't previously wielded. As his wife, mother of his heir, I would have status within his organization. Respect, perhaps even influence in time. It wasn't freedom, not truly, but it was a different kind of cage, one with a view, with room to move, with the possibility of gradual expansion. And our child would have both parents, security, opportunities beyond what I could provide alone. Time to decide, Eliza, Antonio said, glancing at his watch. The pilot has filed our flight plan. Security is waiting downstairs. I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that this elaborate negotiation was merely a pretense before returning to the status quo. What I saw instead surprised me. An intensity that went beyond possession, beyond control, something that, in another man, might be called vulnerability. Yes, I said finally. I'll come back, under these terms, for our child. Relief flickered across his features before his composed mask returned. A wise decision. He extended his hand to help me rise from the sofa. I hesitated briefly before placing my fingers in his palm, feeling the familiar calluses on his trigger finger, the strength that could be brutal or gentle depending on his mood. Antonio pulled me to my feet with effortless grace, then used the momentum to draw me closer until barely an inch separated us. One more thing, he murmured, his breath warm against my face. If you ever run again, if you ever take my child from me, there will be no negotiation, no agreement, only consequences. Do you understand? The threat should have terrified me. Instead, it clarified something essential, Antonio's fear. Not that I would escape him permanently. He'd already proven I couldn't. But that I would separate him from his child, deny him the family connection he clearly valued above all else. I understand, I replied, holding his gaze. And I want you to understand something too. I didn't run because I didn't care for you. I ran because I couldn't breathe, because I needed to know I could make choices. For myself, for our baby. If you really want me back, not just as a possession, but as a partner, then you need to let me breathe. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps at my boldness, or at the implicit admission that I cared for him despite everything. I need you, he said simply. Words I'd never expected to hear from Antonio Ricci, who needed no one, who had built an empire on self-sufficiency and calculated advantage. Before I could respond, he closed the remaining distance between us, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was both possession and plea. My body responded instantly, traitorously to his touch. The chemistry between us had always been undeniable, a force as powerful as his will or my fear. His hands cradled my face with surprising gentleness, thumbs stroking my cheekbones as if I were something precious rather than retrieved property. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, I saw a new determination in his eyes. "You'll have your space to breathe," he promised. "But you'll do it by my side, as my wife, as the mother of my child." "When?" I asked. "This wedding you've suddenly decided is necessary?" "Next week. Small ceremony at the estate. Just family and the necessary witnesses." His tone made it clear this detail had already been arranged, another decision made without my input. I stiffened. "That's exactly what I'm talking about, Antonio. You've already planned everything, haven't you? Without asking what I might want?" He frowned slightly. "It's more secure that way, private, protected. It's also another example of you making unilateral decisions about my life." I stepped back, creating space between us. "If we're going to try this new arrangement, this partnership you claim to want, then it starts now, not after the paperwork is signed, not after we're back on your territory. Now." Antonio's eyes narrowed, but he didn't immediately dismiss my objection. I could almost see the calculations running behind those dark irises, weighing the benefits of asserting control against the value of securing my willing cooperation. "What would you prefer?" he asked finally, the question itself a concession. "A month," I said. "Time to adjust to this new reality, to see if you're serious about the changes you've promised." I gestured to the contract on the table. "Time to have my own lawyer review that agreement." His eyebrows rose. "You have a lawyer?" "I will," I countered. "One not on your payroll. Independent counsel." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "That creates security concerns." "Then vet them. Run your background checks. But I need someone looking out for my interests, not yours." Again, that calculating pause. Then, unexpectedly, a slight smile. "You've changed, Tesoro, grown claws while you were away." "I've always had them. You just never gave me reason to use them before." His smile deepened to something like approval. 2 weeks, he counter-offered. "Enough time for your independent review. The ceremony happens at the estate, with full security protocols, non-negotiable." It wasn't everything I'd asked for, but it was more than I'd expected to receive. Agreed. "And I choose my own dress." This earned a genuine laugh, the rare, unguarded sound that had first made me see him as a man rather than a monster. "The dress is yours to decide. Everything else, guest list, security, timing, remains mine." "And the honeymoon?" I asked, suddenly curious if this figured into his plans. "Italy," he said without hesitation. "My villa in Positano, private, secure, and..." His eyes softened fractionally. "Beautiful enough even for you." The thought of the Amalfi Coast, of sun-drenched cliffs and Mediterranean waters, was undeniably appealing. A true vacation, rather than a business trip where I'd been primarily decorative, might actually be pleasant, even with security hovering discreetly in the background. "I'd like that," I admitted. Antonio checked his watch again. "Now, we really must go. The jet is waiting." This time, I nodded without argument. I'd secured what concessions I could for now. The real battle for independence, for partnership, would unfold over months and years, a marathon, not a sprint. "I have nothing with me," I reminded him. "No passport, no clothes." "All arranged," he replied dismissively. "New passport waiting on the plane. Clothes at home." His eyes traveled down my body, a familiar heat in his gaze. "Though I've always preferred you without them." The casual intimacy of the remark brought color to my cheeks. This, too, was part of Antonio's power over me, his ability to shift from business to bedroom with a single glance, a single suggestive comment. The physical connection between us had always been intense, overwhelming my better judgment and blurring the lines of my captivity. "The plane," I prompted, unwilling to let him see how easily he could still affect me. He nodded, offering his arm in a courtly gesture at odds with the modern setting. I hesitated only briefly before placing my hand in the crook of his elbow, allowing him to guide me toward the elevator. As we descended to the lobby, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't returning to captivity. Not exactly. Nor was I achieving the freedom I'd sought when I fled with a duffel bag of meager possessions and desperate hopes. I was entering something new, undefined, with both risks and potential rewards I couldn't fully calculate. The lobby was conspicuously empty when the elevator doors opened, cleared of witnesses no doubt on Antonio's orders. Outside, A black SUV idled at the curb, flanked by two more identical vehicles. Marco stood beside the center car, opening the door as we approached. "Everything secure?" Antonio asked him. "Yes, boss. Route confirmed. Decoys in place." Marco's eyes flicked to me briefly, his expression unreadable. Had he been the one to track me to Toronto? To report my prenatal appointment, my job at the cafe? Probably. Marco's loyalty to Antonio was absolute. His efficiency legendary within the organization. Antonio helped me into the vehicle's plush interior before sliding in beside me. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing us in climate-controlled privacy. The partition between us and the driver was already raised. "Comfortable?" Antonio asked as the SUV pulled away from the curb. "Yes," I answered automatically, then realized it was true. After weeks of cheap motels and a Spartan apartment, the vehicle's leather upholstery and smooth ride were luxuries I'd forgotten I'd grown accustomed to. Antonio reached for my hand, entwining our fingers. "The flight is just over 2 hours. You should rest. You look exhausted." I was exhausted, bone-deep tired from weeks of hypervigilance, from constant fear of discovery that had, in the end, proved entirely justified. Now, with the decision made and my immediate future settled, the adrenaline that had kept me functioning was rapidly ebbing, leaving leaden fatigue in its wake. "I might sleep on the plane," I conceded. "Good." His thumb traced idle patterns on my palm, the casual intimacy both comforting and confusing. "When we land, we'll go directly to the estate. Dr. Maloney will examine you first thing tomorrow." The estate. Home, according to Antonio. Prison, according to my recent perspective. The truth I was beginning to understand lay somewhere in between, a place defined less by its physical boundaries than by the power dynamics within them, dynamics I was now cautiously attempting to shift. "And then?" I asked. "Then we begin our new arrangement," he replied simply. "You'll review the contract with your lawyer. I'll make the necessary adjustments to security protocols. We'll announce our engagement." "Announce it to whom? Your criminal associates?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Antonio's expression hardened slightly. "To family, to business partners, to society, in appropriate venues." His grip tightened on my hand. "You'll find, Eliza, that the line between criminal and legitimate is far less clear than your American movies would suggest. Many of my associates are respected businessmen, philanthropists, civic leaders, who also happen to engage in racketeering, money laundering, and worse. The world is complex. People are complex." His dark eyes held mine. "I am complex. As are you, it seems." "What does that mean?" "It means you claim to despise what I do, who I am, yet you're drawn to me nonetheless. It means you ran from me, but couldn't bring yourself to go far enough that I wouldn't find you. It means you negotiate terms like a seasoned consigliere while trembling at my touch." His free hand moved to my face, fingers tracing my jawline. "Complex." I wanted to deny it, to present my motivations as pure and straightforward, protection for my child, escape from control, but he wasn't entirely wrong. Something in me responded to Antonio in ways I couldn't fully rationalize, a pull that transcended fear or pragmatism. "Perhaps," I admitted. "We're both more complicated than simple labels would suggest." His answering smile held genuine warmth. "This is why you fascinate me, Eliza. Just when I think I have you categorized, you surprise me." We lapsed into silence as the motorcade navigated Toronto's evening traffic. Through tinted windows, I watched the city I'd briefly called home recede, the anonymous streets where I'd walked without guards, the cafe where I'd earned honest wages, the clinic where I'd first seen visual evidence of the life growing inside me. A chapter closing, neither entirely failure nor success. At the private airfield, Antonio's jet waited as promised. Sleek, white, obscenely luxurious. More guards formed a perimeter as we transferred from vehicles to aircraft, their vigilance a reminder of the world I was re-entering. A world of wealth and danger, of protection, that doubled as confinement. Inside, the jet's interior gleamed with leather and polished wood. A flight attendant greeted us with practiced deference, offering drinks, snacks, anything we might desire for the short journey. I declined everything except water, suddenly overwhelmed by the transition from my modest Toronto existence back into Antonio's rarefied atmosphere. Antonio guided me to a plush seat, buckling me in with proprietary care before taking his place opposite. As the engines hummed to life and the plane began to taxi, he studied me with an intensity that might have unnerved me weeks earlier. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly. I considered lying, then decided against it. Our new arrangement, whatever it proved to be, should begin with honesty. Many. But also certainty that this is the right choice for our child. He nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. "Rest now, tesoro. Everything else can wait until we're home." Home. The word still felt complicated, loaded with contradictions. But as the plane lifted into the night sky, leaving Canadian soil and my brief taste of independence behind, I found myself oddly calm. The future stretching before me wasn't the freedom I'd sought, nor the captivity I'd fled. It was something uncharted, a negotiated space between Antonio's control and my autonomy. I placed a protective hand over my stomach, over the child who had changed everything, who had driven me to flee, and ultimately brought me back under modified terms. This small life, not yet visible to the world, had already reshaped power dynamics that had seemed immutable. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, echoing the promise I'd made in that motel room so many nights ago. Different circumstances, different context, but the same essential truth. I would protect this child, find a way forward, create a life that balanced safety and freedom. Across from me, Antonio watched with those perceptive dark eyes, missing nothing. He reached across the space between us, placing his hand over mine on my stomach, our child sheltered beneath the touch of both parents. "Yes," he agreed softly. "We are." And for the first time since I'd entered his world, I believed it might actually be true.